The Orioles have taken a waiver claim reliever and turned him into a first-round draft pick as Bryan Baker is headed to the Rays. Does this mean more selling is coming? We'll break down the trade and discuss it all coming up on this live episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, July 10th, 2025, and welcome into a special live edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on this live episode, we are going to react to the breaking news of the day. Not that the Orioles just swept the Mets in a doubleheader. There will still be a Friday episode coming out tomorrow, which will be in your feeds in the morning, recapping everything from those two pretty good-looking wins for the Orioles over New York as they took both of these games and win the series over the Mets. No, in this one, we're going to talk about the bigger news from the morning, and that is the Orioles have traded right-handed reliever Bryan Baker to the Tampa Bay Rays in exchange for a competitive balanced draft pick, the 37th overall pick in Sunday's upcoming 2025 MLB Draft. Wish it could have gone live sooner, but as many know who have listened and watched this show, I have a full-time job. When the Orioles make a trade at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, it's really, really tough to get anything done until I get home from work. Hopefully, some of you all are settled in here on 8:30 on a Thursday evening to talk about this Bryan Baker trade. So I'm going to break it down from every angle. We will talk about why the Orioles decided to deal Bryan Baker, even though he wasn't a rental piece, what the return of just a draft pick means and how good of a return that is. And then we'll talk about the impact on the Orioles bullpen for now and what this means for the O's deadline plans as we are now 3 weeks away from the actual trade deadline. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So thank you everyone who is joining us here live on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you're not, you're just listening via audio later. That's amazing too. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to give us a follow or subscribe wherever you listen. 5-star rating and a review really helps out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you're here on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We just passed 9,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is thanks to you all. We're going to be doing a giveaway on the pod next week to celebrate 9,000 subscribers, but you have to be subscribed on YouTube to enter. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and jump into the comments here. We got a conversation going on with this Orioles trade and with some Orioles fans. And if you do have any questions, maybe more so specifically to this Baker trade, you can throw them into the comment section here on YouTube. And if I don't answer them throughout the episode, I'll take a little bit of time at the end to answer some questions as of now, or at least at that point at the end of the show. So let's talk about it, right? I didn't think the Orioles would start making moves on July 10th, 3 weeks before the deadline, but here they are. The official trade, as Robert Murray of Fansided first broke on Thursday morning. The Orioles have dealt Bryan Baker, their 30-year-old right-handed reliever, to the Tampa Bay Rays. In exchange, the Rays are giving the Orioles the 37th overall pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, which commences on Sunday. Now, most MLB Draft picks are not eligible to be traded. It is not like the NFL or the NBA where teams are always trading draft picks right and left. In Major League Baseball, most draft picks are not eligible to be traded except for compensation picks. Any comp picks, usually between like picks 30 and 40, and then the second round ones are usually between like picks 60 and 70, are the only picks, and not every team has one, they're the only picks eligible to be traded. That is what the Orioles get back, 37th overall. To put it in perspective, right around 37 is where the Orioles have found Gunnar Henderson and Jordan Westburg in previous drafts. So that is the potential of the kind of player you could get with pick number 37. But let's start from the Bryan Baker side of this and why the Orioles made this trade and why they made the trade when they did. Let's start with Bryan Baker this season, because it has certainly been a bounce back year for Baker. This was entering play on Thursday, so some of these rankings don't include the two games the Orioles won over the Mets. But Baker at the time of the trade, 38 and a third innings pitched this year. That led all Orioles relievers. His 3.52 ERA was third in that Oriole bullpen. Remember, that jumped way up with his terrible outing on Tuesday night. His 33% strikeout rate, that's third in that bullpen. His 6% walk rate, second lowest in that bullpen, but it's only higher than Matt Bowman, who's not even in the pen right now. So you could really say Baker was number one. And his 26.5% strikeout minus walk rate, first on the team and 13th among all big league relievers. And his 2.78 xFIP, which is basically home run rate is evened out as you're fielding independent pitching. It basically strips out all of the luck involved and says, okay, what should your ERA really be if there's no luck involved in baseball? 2.78 is pretty low, best on the Orioles, and 16th among big league. I can't say big league today for some reason, among MLB relievers. And it's been a good year, right? His fastball has been up to 97, 98. His slider's been okay, but the changeup, he found a new grip on that pitch in spring training. Hitters batting only 154 against that changeup with a 34% whiff rate. It's allowed him to be just as good, if not better, against lefties than he's been against righties this year. And it's certainly been a resurgent season for Bryan Baker, the 129 stuff plus on his changeup. Only two relievers in the majors have a better changeup via stuff than Bryan Baker this year. He's always had really good stuff, even when he has been struggling. And that's why the Orioles kept him around. And I know many people were kind of shocked by this trade, not just the timing of it being 3 weeks before the deadline, but with it being Bryan Baker, not a rental reliever, a guy who has multiple years of control, with the Orioles theoretically wanting to contend right back here in 2026 and thinking, well, Baker's been so good this year. Wouldn't he be a part of that team? Why are you trading him away? But Mike Elias did say, and he spoke to the media on Thursday morning before the game, but after the trade, and he said the Orioles were not actively shopping Bryan Baker, at least not at this time. I think they would have been eventually, but rather the Rays were just actively pursuing him and basically offered the Orioles a deal that they could not refuse. And listen, he is a relief pitcher having a really good season with 3.5 years of team control. He is not a free agent until after the 2028 season. So if this goes well for the Rays, they get 3.5 years of a good, fairly cheap relief pitcher. That is a good deal for them. But that's if you believe he can maintain his level. That's worth a lot. That'd be worth good stuff to the Orioles as well. If they could guarantee they'd get this Bryan Baker for another 3.5 years, they'd keep him. He'd be a big part of a bullpen trying to get back to the postseason. But on the flip side, and this is where you start to really understand why the Orioles would be looking to even trade Bryan Baker at this point, is that he is out of options. He no longer has that roster flexibility. For the first time here in 2025, Bryan Baker no longer had minor league options. What that means is if you want to, he's struggling, whatever, you need a fresh arm, and you want to send him to AAA, you can no longer freely do that. He would have to pass through waivers and be opened up basically for free to all 29 other teams before you could send him down to AAA. And that means a lot when you have a bullpen, especially like the Orioles bullpen, which doesn't have a lot of pitchers in it that have those minor league options. And relievers are always volatile, right? If you go and look at just the best relievers in terms of ERA and stuff, if you go back to 2022, you could even go back to 2023, but let's say 2022. If you go back there and you look at that list, it is wildly different. Just 3 years later, right? Bryan Baker's got 3.5 years of control. Just 3 years later to what the best relievers look like this year. Like if you just pull up relief pitchers from 2022, number one in ERA is Evan Phillips. He's not even pitching right now for the Dodgers. Number two is Ryan Stanek. He just gave up that home run to Gunnar today. He's like a middle reliever for Houston. Number three is Ryan Helsley, who's still a good closer, but not nearly the pitcher he was. Number 6 in ERA, Cionel Perez. He's in AAA. Number 7 in ERA, Anthony Bass, not pitching in the majors. Number 9, Eric Swanson, not pitching in the majors, I don't think at this point. Daniel Bard, number 10, not pitching in the majors. Alexis Diaz, number 11, was just recalled from AAA by the Dodgers because he'd been down there and been so bad. Like this just changes so much from year to year, unless you're like an elite closer, right? Edwin Diaz, number 4, Emmanuel Clase, number 5 on this list, Jason Adam, number 8. Those are the crazy top of the market elite guys who have done it for years and years, but relievers just pop up and go away all the time. And for Bryan Baker, he's even more volatile, right? The Orioles get him in a waiver claim from the Toronto Blue Jays after the 2021 season. They bring him in 2022, and he has a really good year for that Oriole bullpen. He throws 69 and 2/3 innings. He has a 3.49 ERA, solid strikeout to walk numbers. Really, when the Orioles traded Jorge Lopez at the deadline, Bryan Baker kind of became their main right-handed setup man. Bautista moved into the closer role, and then it was like Perez was the lefty setup man and Baker was the righty setup man. He was in a pretty big role as that 2022 team tried to make the playoffs, and he came back and he was still, okay in 2023, 45 innings, a 3.60 ERA, but his walks went up, his FIP went up. He kind of crumbled in the second half. Remember, Baker spent a good chunk of the second half of the year in AAA. Then the Orioles, for some reason, put him on the playoff roster in 2023, and he had a bad outing in game 2 of that series. And then 2024, he was just a disaster. He spent most of the year in AAA, only threw 23 big league innings and had a 5.01 ERA. His strikeouts went way down, and it was just like, what in the world happened to Bryan Baker? But he made some adjustments. He fixed the changeup. He came to spring training knowing he was out of options. So it was do or die time, right? Baker was on the roster bubble coming into Sarasota this year. There's a way this goes where Baker is DFA'd before opening day and he's in another organization in April. That was a very real possibility at the beginning of this season. But he turned it on. He was good in spring. He was out of options. He fixed some of his pitches. He made the opening day roster out of the bullpen. And now he was very much in a low leverage role to begin the year. But throughout April, he just got better and better. And the Orioles they pushed him into 7th and 8th inning roles and he thrived. Obviously, he had a couple of bad outings. And it does suck that his final outing as an Oriole was 4 batters faced, 2 homers, 4 runs, no outs as he blows that 4-run lead in the 8th inning in the loss to the Mets on Tuesday. But don't let that be your memory of 2025 Bryan Baker. He was tremendous. I mean, you could argue he's been the best Orioles reliever this year, at worst third best and probably somewhere second best. I mean, Felix Bautista and Seranthony Dominguez are the other 2 guys in the conversation for best Orioles reliever, but Baker is right there. That is how good he has been this season. And think about it. Don't lie. If you were an Orioles fan, most likely you would have been okay if you got an alert on March 25th that the Orioles had DFA'd Bryan Baker because he didn't make the opening day roster. You would have been like, whatever, he hasn't been that good lately. We'll have another good reliever here. I really don't think, let me know in the comments, I really don't think many of you, me included, would have been too bent out of shape if Bryan Baker was DFA'd and didn't make the roster in March. And now you turn him into something valuable. That is a pretty great turnaround for Orioles pitching development. And the O's, why are they making this trade? Well, they're kind of banking on the fact that his value will never be higher. I mean, relievers can pitch well into their 30s, but he is already 30 years old. He, again, is out of options, which makes it way less flexible. And he's been such an up and down pitcher, and relievers are like that. And you capitalize and sell high on that right now when it's pretty clear, even with the 2 wins Thursday, you're just not going to be in it. It's just so unlikely the Orioles turn this around and make the playoffs in 2025. It's a time to make this trade. And you can say, Connor, haven't you said that the Orioles trades, if they're sellers this deadline, should be getting players that help them in 2026? I still 100% agree with that statement, and that's what they should be doing. But here's the thing with Bryan Baker. By 2026, if you're saying, Connor, he could be in this bullpen like this, being this good for 3 more years, why would the Orioles give up on it? Isn't this a full sell if you're trading a guy with 3.5 years of control? Well, think about this scenario. It's June of 2026. Bryan Baker has a 5 ERA. He's struggling again. He's walking guys. Your bullpen is tired. He can't pitch in high leverage, and you are a contending team, right? You're 5 games over 500. You're right in a playoff race, and you feel you have no choice but to DFA him because he's been so bad, and so you designate him for assignment. Someone claims him off waivers, and you lose him for nothing. Instead, while you don't need him for the rest of this year because you're not going to make the playoffs, you get the 37th overall pick in the draft. I think the Orioles saw this as his value is never going to be higher. Mike Elias and his staff have done a great job of building bullpens in different ways over the past few years. And I am very confident that although Baker has had a great bounce back season here in 2025, his value will never be higher. And I think and you really have to think about it for the 2026 bullpen, because again, the O's still could turn it around. It's highly unlikely for this year. So you're thinking about, okay, who is his replacement in the bullpen next year and the year beyond that and that? That's what I'm really thinking about. I don't think the O's will have a problem replacing the production of a 7th inning reliever who's been really good. They've shown they've been able to find those guys time and time again. They did it with Baker. They will get the next Bryan Baker. I'm fairly confident that relievers are guys who it can be really, really good to sell high on them and reap the rewards. The Orioles did it with Jorge Lopez, and I didn't love that trade at the time, but it netted them Cade Povich and your Cano and two still solid pitching prospects in the rotation. That turned out to be a great trade that the Orioles made at the 2022 deadline. This is a little different because it's just Baker for a draft pick, and there's a little more uncertainty, and you're not getting a guy like Cano who already had big league experience, like you're a little further away. But they maximized the value on Bryan Baker. And if this were a position player or someone more important to the team, I'd say, why are you thinking about maximizing value when you should be just trying to win again next year? But relievers are so different. They are so up and down. Every year, year to year, you just don't know. When they're not Felix Bautista, when they're not Emmanuel Clase, when they're not Edwin, and even those guys have up and down years. When they're not the cream of the crop, you just never know. Bryan Baker, I would be not surprised at all if he had a 5 ERA for the Rays next year and they were looking elsewhere. That's the reality of relievers. When they peak and you're not in it and you don't need them to try and win a pennant, trade them. And that is what the Orioles did here with Baker, and I think they got a really good deal. And again, it stinks that his final outing went like that. But clearly smart teams, the Rays are a smart team. The Rays are in the thick of an AL East playoff race right now. Clearly smart teams value Bryan Baker as the Rays did when they aggressively pursued him and made a pretty high offer to go and get him because he's a good reliever right now. But you took a 2021 waiver claim, you built him up, and you turned him into a big-time draft pick, and that is a win. So how valuable really is this draft pick? It's not exactly an NFL or NBA first-round pick. It's a little more complicated than that, but in reality, this is a pretty big return for a setup reliever with 1.5 good seasons under his belt. We'll talk about why that's the case coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. If you ever decide at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family, maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. And Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB and Locked On Orioles, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming game. Maybe this weekend, Orioles Marlins. I'll be in the ballpark on Friday night. You want to grab a last minute ticket with a great deal at Game Time? You can come say hi at Camden Yards on Friday for the Kyle Stowers and the Connor Norby return game in Baltimore. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Orioles make their first trade of this deadline season, and really the first trade in Major League Baseball of this deadline season, shipping Bryan Baker out to the Tampa Bay Rays for the number 37 overall pick, a comp pick. The only kinds of picks you can trade in Major League Baseball are comp picks, and the Orioles get the 37th pick in the MLB Draft. And that's another thing about the timing of this trade that Mike Elias talked about. If the pick was going to be the best deal they could get for Baker, which is clearly the case, I would think. I mean, that's a lot to give up for a reliever, which we'll talk about. This deal had to be made now because the draft is on Sunday, and this pick is for Sunday's draft. So you can't wait much longer if you think you have a chance to get a top 40 pick for Bryan Baker. And that's why the Orioles moved so fast and made this deal still 3 weeks before the trade deadline. But let's talk about this pick because it's a little harder to talk about than a player, a prospect, a pitching, whomever it may be. You know, if say the Orioles got 2 prospects from the Rays for Bryan Baker, we could break down who they are, their stats so far, the stuff they have, the tools they have, where they were drafted, how close they are to the big leagues, all that good stuff. But with a draft pick, it's A, you don't know who the player will be yet because you still got to make that pick in 4 days. And B, it's harder to think like what is the value And is this an even trade, a draft pick for a player? Because you rarely see these kinds of trades in Major League Baseball because most draft picks are not allowed to be dealt. So you don't see a lot of deals that include them. Remember, the Orioles did trade a draft pick for Corbin Burns. It was DL Hall, Joey Ortiz, and a comp round draft pick for Corbin Burns. They've done it before. They got a comp pick, what was it, back, I believe, in the Tanner Scott, Cole Sulser deal to the Marlins a couple of years ago. So they've been involved in trades like this before, but never in a one-for-one just to go get a reliever. So the pick is number 37 overall in the draft. And as I mentioned in Major League Baseball, the comp picks are the only ones that can be traded. That's either competitive balance picks that are given out to certain lower market teams to kind of basically balance the competition and give them a little more leeway if they're not able to spend all that money that other teams are because there's no salary cap in Major League Baseball, or the picks you get when you offer a player who's going to be a free agent the qualifying offer and he declines it and signs elsewhere, you get a draft pick. The Orioles have two of those. They got one from Anthony Santander and one from Corbin Burns this offseason. Number 37 is a competitive balance pick that the Rays had this year from being a small market team. Now, little explainer on the MLB draft and kind of how this all plays in and factors into the decision that the Orioles made. The Major League Baseball draft, each pick has a slot value. That is for the signing bonus you get when you are in that pick. Now, NFL and NBA works kind of similarly, but it doesn't change as much pick by pick. It's more about the rounds and the area you're picked in, how much your bonus can be that you get when you sign that rookie contract. It works a little bit different in Major League Baseball. Every single pick in the first 10 rounds has a recommended slot value assigned to the pick. So the number one overall pick has the highest slot value. Right now, it's around $9-ish million that you would recommend at the number one pick. And then it goes all the way down to, 100,000 or less as the picks get closer to the 10th round, but it goes down every single pick for that recommended value. When you take all the picks you have coming up in a draft and you add up all the money of the slot values, for the Orioles, they have pick number 19, they have pick number 30, 31, 37, 58, 69, and then the third round, fourth round, fifth round. You add up all of the slot values. That is what is called your bonus pool. And that is the amount of money total that is allowed for you to spend on bonuses to sign all of your draft picks in the 20-round MLB draft. And the Orioles actually now have 24 picks in this draft because of all of the extra comp picks that they have. I believe it's 24 picks they have, either 23 or 24 picks. Either way, they have extra picks. So that means their bonus pool is higher because they have more picks of more value to add to it. With adding this number 37 pick, the Orioles have added a lot more money to their pool. This pick is worth over $2-something million in that slot value. Their bonus pool is now $19,144,500. That is the amount of money the Orioles have to spend on all of their draft picks that they make on Sunday and Monday. And you don't have to pay the draft picks exactly that slot value of their pick. You can pay them lower. That's what we call an underslot player, or you can pay them over. Maybe you have to convince them more to sign with you because they want to, they're a high school player who wants to go to college. They want to go back to college to get NIL money. So you have to pay them over slot to convince them to sign with you. Once you draft them, they're not automatically in your organization. You have to get them to sign that contract. Now, you can go over your bonus pool anywhere from 0 to 5% over. You pay a tax. Anything more than 5% over, you start forfeiting future draft picks. So most teams don't go over that bonus pool. But because the Orioles now have those 4 compensation picks, they have the 3 after the first round, and they have another one after the second round. So they do have 24 picks in 20 rounds. They have the highest bonus pool of the year at about $19.1 million. And they also have, and shout out to Jim Callis at MLB.com for writing about this, they have the highest bonus pool ever. This bonus pool system started back in 2012. So this will be the 14th draft with the bonus pool system. And the Orioles have the highest pool ever. And usually that's when you pick number 1, you have comp picks. They're picking number 19 in the first round, and they still have the highest bonus pool. So it's not just about having the most picks. It's also having more money that you can spread around. You underslot one guy, so then you can pay a interesting high schooler, just like what they did with Gunnar Henderson and Kobe Mayo in recent drafts to get them to sign with them at a high school instead of going to big-time college programs. So right now, the Orioles have pick number 19 in the first round, picks numbers 30 and 31 as comp picks for Santander and Burns, pick number 37 coming from the Rays, and then they also have pick number 58, their second round pick, and pick number 69, which is a competitive balance comp pick after the second round. 4 picks in the top 37, 6 picks in the top 69 is basically unprecedented for a team to have in the draft. And if there's one thing you can say, Mike Elias and Matt Blood, the scouting director, and all this front office has done a pretty amazing job of so far since they've taken over the Orioles, is in 2024, jury's still out on that draft. But otherwise, they have killed the MLB draft. Elias and his crew have done fantastic things through the draft to build up the system. Now you give him 4 of the top 37 picks with the biggest bonus pool ever. That is why Elias and the front office's eyes get wide when you get that kind of offer from the Rays. You get a draft slot worth $2.5 million, the number 37 overall pick. That is really, really valuable to give up. You listen to anybody who covers the draft, covers prospects, they'll say there's not a lot of prospect returns for a reliever that's more valuable than actually getting this pick that the Rays gave to the Orioles on Thursday. They have a chance to kill this draft big time and restock this system, give the Orioles more better prospects, but also players they can then immediately trade in the offseason or next year to improve this roster and be a winner again next year. That's how this trade can still help in 2026 while not immediately getting them a player. Because listen, you draft a guy in 2025, at best, if he's really quick, maybe you see him by 2027, but probably not going to see a player next year that you would draft 37th overall. But that is the roundabout way it can still help you. And the other thing, which Elias did a little bit allude to when he was asked about it on Thursday, now having 4 picks in the top 37, especially 3, 30, 31, and 37, I think makes it way more likely the Orioles finally take a pitcher early in this draft. I think there's a really good shot with either 30, 31, or 37. The Orioles take a pitcher. That'd be the highest Mike Elias has ever drafted a pitcher, because even though they see it as being so much risk to draft a pitcher that early, when you have now 4 picks in the top 37, you have a lot more leeway for, if it does potentially go wrong, to take an arm there. I'm not saying it will happen. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't, but I think there is a really high chance the Orioles finally take a pitcher that high in the draft, and it comes up because they were able to get this number 37 pick. So for fans who are like upset with this deal, we only got a draft pick. If Elias uses pick number 37 to take a big time college pitcher, would that change your mind on this trade? Definitely let me know here in the YouTube comments as well. So that's why they did what they did. But one more thing to talk about really is, how does this impact the Orioles roster, right? Maybe not as important for this year, but moving forward, they now don't have a guy that they could have had for the next 3.5 years who could be a good reliever for that long. Don't think he will be, but could be. So what does the Orioles bullpen and roster look like without Bryan Baker? We'll talk about that coming up next to finish out the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? No, you called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Did you juggle 2 phones to keep business and personal calls separate? OpenPhone solves that. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. And OpenPhone is offering Locked On Orioles listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonmlb. That's openphone.com/lockedonmlb. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. That's at OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. So the Orioles traded Bryan Baker to the Tampa Bay Rays, getting a draft pick back. Again, if you do have further questions about this trade, put them in the chat here if you're watching live on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Thank you so much for doing so. And if I have some time at the end here, we'll answer maybe a few of those questions. But first, I want to talk about how this impacts the Orioles roster. So very briefly, the Orioles were sort of down one reliever. It was a lot of transactions they had to make after they made that trade before the game. Now, what happened was initially David Banuelos, their taxi squad catcher, was activated onto the roster. That was because Grant Wolfram was already here and he was scheduled to be the 27th man. Remember, when you play a doubleheader, you get an extra player. So they activated left-handed pitcher Grant Wolfram to be the 27th man, but technically he would only be the 26th man because Baker was gone. So you still got another roster spot, and Banuelos was most likely the only other guy who was there. So it was just like, hey, we might as well play with the full 27 players. Let's just throw Banuelos on the roster. And that is what they did. Now, Banuelos was active for one game, then he was optioned to AAA, and they got Colin Selby to Baltimore, who then was active for game 2 of the doubleheader. So right now, as I speak, both Selby and Wolfram are on the roster. One of them will have to be sent back to AAA, but the other one will stay and kind of take Bryan Baker's spot on the roster for now. And quite honestly, I'm giving that to Grant Wolfram. What he did, those 2 just marvelous, scoreless, dominant innings in the 7th and 8th in game 1 of the doubleheader on Thursday, that's kind of what he's been doing in AAA Norfolk. Wolfram, hard-throwing left-hander, good slider, good curveball. Orioles got him in kind of a fairly minor trade with the Brewers back in April. He hadn't even debuted in the big leagues. Pitched a couple of times with the O's in April and then went back down to AAA. Had been pitching great since then. Good strikeout rates, low walk rates, got a 2.5 FIP in Norfolk in 27 innings. Gives you a second left-hander in the pen because Aiken's on the IL. It's only Gregory Soto right now. So I think it will be Grant Wolfram. Now, if they could use it also as an up-down spot, it gets Colin Selby, Yarmil Geraldo, Cade Stroud, all righties who we've seen at times this year, kind of into the mix as well. But I think Wolfram, from what we saw Thursday, that should be the guy, especially to give you another lefty. And listen, Gregory Soto is probably also going to be traded, so you might want another lefty beyond Wolfram. He's going to get some run here, and he certainly deserves it from what we saw on Thursday. Now, for the bullpen roles, you do lose a high-leverage guy in Baker. Baker was second on the Orioles in Fangraph's leverage index entering Thursday's games. Basically means he was pitching in the second biggest spots of any Orioles reliever. Only Felix Bautista, and that's what happens when you're a closer and you enter the 9th, had a higher leverage index than Baker. Not Soto, not Dominguez, not Cano. It was Baker who was entering in the biggest spots for the Orioles before the 9th inning. So that's a hole you got to fill. Now, Seranthony Dominguez is kind of clear as that number 2 closer option, your kind of best 8th inning option, your fireman in the pen. But I think there'll be a few more chances maybe for Gregory Soto, although he'll kind of stick with the toughest lefty pockets. Maybe if you trust Wolfram in those early lefty pockets, you can go to Soto as a setup man. But you're also going to see more Andrew Kittredge. He's been really good lately. I think he slides into, at least for now, until we get closer to the deadline, into more of that Bryan Baker role. And you do have Cano back, who they're trusting a little bit more, but it'll also be much different once other relievers are dealt. I mean, there's a chance that Seranthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, Andrew Kittredge are all also traded before the deadline. Then you got a lot of shuffling to do in your roles. But right now, Kittredge kind of slides in, and I think Wolfram kind of deserves that other roster spot that's open. Now, in terms of the deadline plans, this is the other thing that I think people were concerned about, is that, the Orioles 3 weeks before the deadline, when they're saying, hey, we're still giving ourselves time to see how we play and see if there's a chance we won't have to be sellers if we play really well over the next 2.5 weeks. Instead, they make a trade 3 weeks before the deadline, and it wasn't one of the rentals. Like, you could even see the Orioles doing something where, say they play great in the next 3 weeks, and they get back, like, truly into the wild card mix by the time we get to the deadline. There's still a chance, even in that scenario, that the Orioles do trade away a couple of their rental pieces who they know they're not bringing back and they can easily replace and get something for. And then maybe they buy a little bit as well, kind of play both sides. But when they trade a guy with 3.5 years of team control, that is not a rental player. That is a guy who certainly could have helped you next year and potentially beyond. So there was a freak out of, like, are the Orioles already committing to a full sell-off? And is this going to be more than just selling the rentals? I would pull back from that a little bit because of everything I talked about earlier with why it made sense to trade Bryan Baker. I just don't see this really changing the Orioles' deadline plans. And I said it, if you're locked on Orioles head and you listen to the end part of Wednesday's episode, the ball knowers were in on this one. I predicted on Wednesday that the Orioles would trade Bryan Baker. And I didn't know it would happen one day later, 3 weeks before the deadline, but I laid out the reasons why, because it was out of options. He's been so volatile. He'd be worth something. His value was high. I thought they would deal him. And they did it one day later because they got an offer that they really just could not refuse. And just because he has that 3.5 years of team control versus being a rental guy, I don't think signals any kind of full rebuild, right? You're just selling high on a reliever where it makes sense to sell him. And he also had some warts on him. 14% barrel rate against Bryan Baker is the second highest among all big league relievers this year. That's fairly concerning. His hard hit rate is almost 50%. That's been concerning. Obviously, I'm not going to put much stock into what happened on Tuesday, but you don't want that to happen again. That wasn't great, obviously. So, you look around and you say, this makes sense. And again, I don't think it really fully, completely changes things. And as I am talking, I want to give a gigantic shout out here to, who is this? This is Leon B with the comment right now. He's playing for the Rays literally right now, and it isn't going well. Not that this gives the Orioles the ability to feel great about this trade, but Bryan Baker made it to Boston for Rays Red Sox on Thursday night. They put him in the game in the bottom of the seventh with the Rays leading 3-1. Here's Baker's line so far. Walk Trevor Story, walk Romy Gonzalez, RBI double Marcelo Meyer, makes it 3-2. RBI single, two RBI singles, Cedar Rafaela, it's 4-3. Jarren Duran pops out. Roman Anthony grounds out. Baker's thrown 27 pitches. He's got a runner on third and 2 outs. He's trying to get Abraham Toro out to finish a 3-run inning. So not a great start to the Bryan Baker career. And maybe after the outing Tuesday, he was due to have a bit of a struggle going on. Like, that is a potential as well. But I'd say so far, Orioles have won the trade after day one. But what I think this trade does signal, even with them coming out and winning 2 games in a doubleheader against a good Mets team, it signals that this team has kind of accepted they're going to be at least some version of sellers at the deadline. I feel like the Baker trade is separate from anything else they do because it was such a good offer and it was such kind of a perfect time to deal him that you can't look at that Baker trade and say they're going to sell off all these other guys. Like, I thought there was a chance they would maybe trade a guy like Yennier Cano, but I thought it would either be Cano or Baker. Now that it's been Baker, I think they probably keep Cano because he's got a lot of team control left as well. But Elias left the door open in his Thursday comments to not be sellers, but actions speak louder than words. And if they're making this trade 3 weeks before the deadline and they're playing the way they are at 42-50, they should be, right? So the Dominguez, Soto, Charlie Morton, O'Hearn, Mullins, etc., the group of rentals, they should absolutely be on the table. If you get, again, just to finish it off, you get the chance to get the 37th pick for Bryan Baker. Think about what Bryan Baker was this time last year. Tell yourself this time last year when Baker's struggling in AAA that the O's are going to get basically a first-round draft pick in a trade from the Rays, a smart team for Bryan Baker. You would have jumped that up in a second, even if the Orioles were winning. So we thank Bryan Baker for his service. He had some awesome moments. He had some big strikeouts this year, some huge outs in 2022. When he tried to fight the entire Blue Jays organization, that was a nice little touch he put on for the O's. Awesome, some bad moments, but some awesome moments for Bryan Baker. I wish him the best in Tampa Bay and beyond, but I don't think this changes anything. That the Orioles are still, from their deadline plans this year, focused on getting back to it and being a winning baseball team again in 2026. But thank you, everyone who jumped into today's live episode. Thank you so much for joining. Baker did get out of the inning with a strikeout in Boston. So he goes an inning and gives up 3 runs and blows the lead in his first outing with the Rays. Again, I wish him the best, but stuff happens. We'll see him right after the All-Star break as the Orioles go back down to Tampa for that deal. Again, thank you so much if you joined live. If you're listening afterwards, thank you as well. That will do it for this special Thursday edition of the show to talk about the Bryan Baker trade, but we still got more content coming to you on Friday. There's still an Orioles doubleheader sweep, something they haven't done in 9 years. Still got to recap that. So that's coming up on a Friday episode. We'll talk about the big Gunnar home run, another great Morton start, Sugano pulling it back together, Alex Jackson legacy game, and then we'll get you ready for the weekend series. Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers versus Trevor Rogers. It is going to be a fun Marlins-Orioles series to lead us into the All-Star break, and we will certainly have that coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.